Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. Listener David Rees has been to CES. CES has been a big event this year for me. A large portion of the work that I was working on, top secret, behind the scenes stuff, was announced at CES at the start of CES, and it was a strange kind of catharsis in one regard, but then I just realized this is a whole new trajectory in a completely different direction. David Rees is curious about 3D. Now, some background to this. Let me read out his question for a start. At CES, I got a chance to experience Vive, which is a competitive product to Oculus Rift, and I got to spend some time hanging out with one of the technical developers. I was amazed how far virtual reality had come. I'm trying to imagine how this could play out in our lives 50 years from now. I was part of the tail end of a VR movement in the late 90s, and I came to this actually because I met a fellow called Peter Wojciechowski, who was like a VR evangelist in Australia. A fascinating guy. I actually knew his brother through my mother, of all strange connections, and I've kept in contact, well, with Peter Wojciechowski and to a lesser extent with his brother Paul. So when I started developing Noble Ape, it was very much a VR environment. It was very much imagining stereo audio, stereo visual, and experimenting in that space. And I had the opportunity through the late 90s to meet the top pinnacle folks associated with VR. These were people that were building cave environments. These were people that had glasses environments. These were people that had things like floating iPad-like devices that you could look into and move around an environment by moving the iPad-like device. VR at that stage was pretty impressive, but not in any way embracing consumer-level electronics. And then it all died. Like 2000 on, VR was like a tainted word. No one would talk about it. No one would think about it. It wasn't a thing that was worth interacting with. And from my perspective, all the people that had made money from it, there's a fellow who is at Berkeley who has dreadlocks. He was like the pinnacle VR guy. Can't remember what his name is. I'm sure it'll come to me as soon as I stop recording. But all these people that had been VR pitch people were nowhere to be seen. They pulled out their money and they were just happy at that point. And because I'd started and entered into VR, my hopes were with VR then. And I had very strong expectations. I went to the VR Disney installations. I think they had 3 of them at the time, which were truly fascinating. But everything was just slightly behind, and none of it was on consumer electronics. I'm kind of done with VR. I mean, it's easy to get excited about some of it, and some of the stereo stuff is interesting, and you can go to 3D movies and what have you. But the really deep VR that I projected in the next 10 years has not yet arrived. The nature of it being like omnipresent and ability to explore like really deep 3D environments, like what I projected Noble Ape would become, just isn't there. Will I potentially, in the near future, get, an Oculus device or something like that in order to create experiments around Noble Ape? Possibly. Quite possibly. But it would need to be on terms that were my own, and having invested so much time and so much energy and experienced things in VR environments of that era, which were not quite comparable, but pretty close, because they were using really, you've got to imagine like a school room-sized room, just full of Silicon Valley workstations, like multi-million-dollar rooms packed with technology. This was what was being used at the time, which, you probably get in an iPhone today. Not quite comparable, but, the same kind of processing, basically. I don't know. I might get recaptivated by VR, but for now, it's just a technology that I invested a lot of time and energy into that really needs to be omnipresent. The stuff that excites me from this time, which was what I hoped back in 99, 2000, is mobile. And VR needs to move pretty swiftly in order to get to where, mobile computing is currently. Anyway, that's my perspective, David. I could be swiftly changed in that perspective, but for now, maybe in the future. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.